There is a hell, and I am in it. This dreadful admission came from a vision to the Russian Count Rostopchine and was recounted by his grandson, Monsignor Louis Gaston de Segur, in his 1876 book on hell and how to avoid it. But this blind prelate wrote about much more than hell. His life and writings next on Catholic History Trek.
I'm tired of being pushed in corners. I'm tired of your inclusive language that refuses to admit the Son of God is a man.
The dogma lives loudly within you.
But I feel that the greatest destroyer of peace today is abortion.
Make one thing certain, that you keep always close to God.
You've embarked on a Catholic History Trek.
Louis Gaston de Segur was born in 1820 in Paris, descended on his paternal side from the Marquis of Segur, a Marshal of France and Minister of Louis XVI, and Comte de Segur, a companion of Lafayette in America, and on his mother's side was descended from the aforementioned the Russian Count Rostopchine, who burned Moscow in 1812 to keep Napoleon from capturing it. In 1842, the young diplomat Louis de Segur, descended from such prominent European families and assigned to the French embassy at Rome, left his post the following year. He gave up everything, even painting, of which he was very talented, to enter the seminary of St. Sulpice. In 1847, he was ordained a priest and dedicated himself to the evangelization of children, the poor, and imprisoned soldiers in Paris, until he was assigned to a clerical posting in Rome. In his mid-30s, he was stricken with blindness, forcing him to resign this post. He returned to Paris with the honors and privileges of the episcopate, but it seems he wasn't officially named a bishop, likely due to his blindness. So sometimes you'll see him called Bishop de Segur, but I believe he was never actually elevated above the dignity of Monsignor de Segur. He had begun writing booklets in defense of the faith while in Rome, and after he was struck with blindness and removed from his busy schedule, found additional free time, which led to a significant uptick in his writing. It's difficult to find the specifics of his affliction, but it's possibly he was legally blind or partially blind, but probably not totally blind, especially if he was writing countless books. Much of his writing was apologetic in nature, usually directed at an irreligious or secular-minded audience. In other words, his writings would be as relevant today as they were when they were published 1.5 centuries ago. One work, his 1851 book, Short and Familiar Answers to the Most Common Objections Urged Against Religion, sold over 700,000 copies by his death in 1881, and was reprinted in many languages, including French, Italian, German, English, Spanish, and even Hindi. And if you speak Hindi, tum kaise ho. In this book, he addressed objections against the existence of God, the error that we ought to live indulgently, the claim that the early Christians were communists, that Protestants are just as Christian as Catholics, that every man is free to practice his own religion and follow God in his own way, why Latin is the language of the church, and the necessity of going to Mass versus just praying at home, or in our day, what we'd say just watching on TV. Regarding the error that man is free to follow his own religion, de Segur explained the Catholic teaching that everyone is obliged to serve God as God wills, not the other way around. For the use of Latin, the Monsignor pointed out the immutable dogmas require an immutable language, free of alteration, and a universal community required a universal language to preserve a uniform faith. He explained how the enemies of the Church attack the use of Latin, because they are attacking the unchanging teachings of the Church traced back to the Apostles. The line I quoted at the beginning of this episode came from another book of his, the 1876 work, Hell, If There Is One, What It Is, and How to Avoid It. The following lines are from an English translation of one of the chapters of this book. The first happened in my own family at Moscow, to be exact, shortly after the terrible Napoleonic campaign of 1812. My mother's father, Count Rostopchine, military governor of the city, was a close friend of the celebrated General Count Orloff, famed for his valor no less than for his scorn of religion. Yet, Orloff would sometimes remark, "Suppose there's something on the other side of the grave." On one occasion, another general, whom we shall call General V, replied, "Well, if there should be something, the first of us to die will return to warn the other. Are we agreed?" "Agreed," replied Count Orloff, and they gave each other their word of honor. A few weeks later, fierce fighting broke out, one of those long-feared wars which Napoleon was so capable of starting. The Russian army moved to the front, and General V, receiving orders to take over an important port, left immediately. Early one morning, 2 or 3 weeks after he left Moscow, my grandfather was dressing when the door of his room was suddenly thrown open, and Count Orloff rushed in, his eyes wild, his hair uncombed, and his face white. "Orloff, what are you doing here at this hour? And in such a fog? What is the matter with you? What has happened?" "Friend," gasped Orloff, "I think I'm losing my mind. I saw General V." "General V? Oh, is he back?" "No," cried Orloff, throwing himself upon a couch and burying his head in his hands. "No, he has not returned, and that is why I'm so shaken up." My grandfather could understand nothing, and he tried to calm the man. "Come now," he said. "Tell me what has happened, and what this means." With an obvious effort to gain control of himself, Count Orloff told his story. "Not long has passed, Rochefine, since General V and I swore to each other that the first of us to die would return to tell the other, should there be something after death. This morning, while I was laying peacefully in bed, without thinking of him at all, I saw General V before me, just a few feet away. He was standing, and his face was deathly white. With his hand over his heart, he said to me, 'There is a hell, and I am in it.' With that, he disappeared. I ran over to you, almost out of my mind. Ah, what a ghastly experience. I don't know what to think of it." 10 or 12 days later, a war report brought to my grandfather, among other news, the account of General V's death. The very morning of that memorable day in which Count Orloff had seen and heard him at that exact time in which he had appeared to him in Moscow, the wretched general had been shot and instantly killed. Another interesting story from that same book recounts the funeral of Raymond Diocles, professor from the University of Paris. As tradition tells it, the funeral prayers for the repose of his soul were interrupted when his deceased corpse rose up and spoke to those gathered around him that he had been condemned by the just judgment of God. After this, his body fell back into death. As an aside, this miraculous event has been depicted in several artistic works, and it's even been suggested that one of his students was Bruno of Cologne, who was so moved by the event that he abandoned civil life to become a monk and found the Carthusians. But there are some inconsistencies with this version of St. Bruno's life. The primary one perhaps being that Bruno was ordained 27 years before the event took place. Although the Carthusians were founded in the same year, 1084, that Raymond's corpse miraculously informed those around him that he had been condemned. So perhaps it did, in some way, motivate Bruno's formation of the order, or more likely was just a coincidence. On a happier note, Monsignor Louis Gaston de Segur is often credited for bringing about the first Eucharistic Congress, which was held in France in 1881, just a couple weeks after he died on June 9th. And while I have not brought about anything as impressive as Eucharistic Congress, this is the part of the episode where I bring about my request to ask you to leave a rating and review for Catholic History Trek, and to subscribe to us. Gloria Patri et Filio Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio nunc et semper et in saecula saeculorum. Amen.
Thank you for listening to Catholic History Trek. You can reach us at catholichistorytrek@gmail.com.